Welcome to Turning Pain into Purpose with Joeel and Natalie Rivera. In this 4-part podcast, we share the stories of how the heartache and challenges in our lives were the fuel that ignited our passions, called us to become entrepreneurs, and gave us the freedom to determine our destiny and fulfill our life's greater purpose. We hope this show inspires you to believe that within any challenge or pain lies the seeds of possibility for transformation, meaning, and purpose. No matter where you are or what you've been through, you have a unique gift to share with the world. Life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. So welcome everyone, and welcome Joeel, who's in the hot seat today. For anyone Hi. So for anyone who missed the last episode, I was in the hot seat, and this time it's Joel's turn. And I'm excited because I know that Joeel has inspired me since I met him. And not just because he has an epic journey of finding his way through entrepreneurship that he's going to be sharing, but also because his story is also an example of, on one hand, being an honorable, awesome human being, but then also just having that ability to turn curses into blessings and to make the best out of life no matter what life throws at you. So that being said, we're going to get started, and I'm going to start with asking you, Joeel, what was it that made you want to be an entrepreneur? Did you have any sort of exposure that planted that seed?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I'm excited to be kind of sharing my journey and hopefully giving people some seeds and tools. As far as my journey, really as an entrepreneur, there are many different factors that made me or inspired me to really want to be one. For example, I grew up and I saw my dad. My dad had a pretty good job. He was a controller for Baxter Credit Union at the time, and he worked a lot of hours. He traveled a lot. So, there were many times that I would see him go in the morning. Sometimes I did it, and then he would come very late at night. So really having that experience of him always being gone in my earlier part of my age and working so hard and really giving his all to the company, really made me think, it's this kind of what I wanted, especially after he transitioned. He actually left his corporate job, and deep dived, and went into entrepreneurship 100%, bought 32 acres in the mountain of Puerto Rico and started kind of developing them. And really, I saw the difference and the shift in him, but it was an inspiration for me to really also look that there was other ways. My mom, at the same time, and this was before my dad even quit, my mom was also an entrepreneur, and I saw her be an entrepreneur as she was. My parents got divorced at a young age, but even in Puerto Rico, my mom actually used to make those dolls that you move, the marionettes. And she used to make them, and I remember her putting them together and stuff like that. And she actually ended up developing contracts with J.C. Penney's and different stores. They used to carry them. So she was always been a little entrepreneur, always doing arts and crafts and selling them and different things, and always up to something. So when we moved away from Puerto Rico, eventually she ended up opening up a health food store and doing a lot of those things. So after school, I used to go in there and really stock the vitamins that were missing and doing all those little things. But to me, it was very inspirational. It was I used to love doing that. And really the realization that there was other ways than just having traditional employment. So really just watching both of them planted those seeds that this is normal. Entrepreneurship is something that you can do, and it's something that all of us can do. So I had those seeds. I was fortunate enough to have those parents that planted those seeds at a young age.
And so I know you had mentioned at one point that with the health food store, that you'd go to conferences, and part of that would be receiving product, and that might have been being able to see the bigger picture, perhaps, and whatever you did with those products once you got them home. Was there anything that you did during that really had you be involved in the process? And then also when you were younger, that age, was there anything else that you did like your first experience of like being an entrepreneur where you were really hands-on with it?
Well, I was very fortunate that both of my parents included me in their ventures. Like I remember even with my dad going to business meetings, and in Puerto Rico it's a little bit different because he'd be meeting with like the mayor of a town, and we'd be meeting at a restaurant. They would having these discussions, or he was meeting with a contractor or somebody that he was helping build the house or whatever it is. And with my mom it was the same thing. You know, she exposed me. We went to all these different conferences. We went to trade shows. We went to all these different things. So I was exposed at a different level. You know, I was part of those conversations, even though if I wasn't talking. And with the trade shows, one of the things that would happen is that you would have all these booths from all these companies everywhere. And at the end, you know, they had to fly out. So they didn't want to take these things back with them. So they used to give them away for free. And to me, it was that was like a Christmas every time. Like every time my mom said we're going to a trade show, I would get so excited because it was like, oh, we're going to come back with like a car full of things. Like literally our trunk would be full of things. Like the most of the trade show I was walking around, like seeing what products I wanted to take, like what snacks I loved and what other products. And then obviously my mom would tell me, you know, these would sell well at the health food store. So I would let them know, you know, if you're not taking these with you back and you're going to give them away or throw them away, let me know, and I'll come back and pick them up. So as soon as that time, people packing up, I would run. But we would pack the trunk. We would pack the front of the car. We'd literally be sitting with like boxes on top of us and stuff like that. So some of those things, obviously, we sold them back at the health food store. And obviously, it was a way for us to be a part of it and also create some extra revenue for ourselves. But as far as independently, I started selling candy bars in middle school, where we would buy them. Actually, I had a friend that his dad had a business. So he was like, oh, we should sell candy bars. And my dad buys them like in bulk, and then maybe we can buy them from him in bulk and then sell them at school. I don't think his dad knew that we were actually selling them in school because we would have got in trouble. We did not play around with things like that. So, but we were making some extra money and we'd sell them for like $1 in school, and everyone knew. So we were the ones that you weren't allowed to eat candy in school. But it really made me realize that I can make my own money. That it wasn't just seeing my parents, that I can also be a part of this, and that I can have an idea and share an idea with someone and really start making some money. And this was in middle school. So ever since then, I was always looking for different ways to create something.
So you always were trying to have a side hustle, basically?
Basically. And because I was exposed to these things, I was always looking at how businesses work. I was always intrigued when I walked into a store to asking questions, because obviously being in the health food store industry and going to all these different places with them, or even with my dad, it's like learning how these things work. You know, even like buying the concrete and all these things, just being in awe of how that whole industry worked. You know, I was always intrigued in learning more.
And so I guess if you started out kind of with a strong influence and foundation for it, did you choose to go the entrepreneurship path right away, or did you go to school to learn more about it, or what did you do?
Actually, what's interesting is that wasn't really my core passion. I had a passion about it, but I used to watch like documentary like religiously, and I still do. And for those that don't know, like me and Natalie watch about an hour of documentaries and nature documentaries a night. We can basically go on Netflix and have watched almost anything that they have nature-y. So we get excited every time they have something new. But at the time, I grew up being that way. You know, I was looking at encyclopedias I had. I grew up in the library like 24/7. So after school, we would go directly there. So I was always learning about different animals, explorers, and all these different things. They would get us the cassettes. My mom would get me the cassettes that would show all these things. So I envisioned myself being in the jungles with gorillas and really exploring animals. So that was really my passion. So I went to school for zoology. And it didn't work out very well because I failed my first year of college. And that's another story. But during that time, I was still always doing something entrepreneurship. You know, I was cutting hair and making some money on the side doing that. And also doing other things, which I won't get into right now. But I was always trying to find different ways to make a buck on the side, you know, and going to zoology. And I did, you know, I failed my first year terribly. And most people think it's hard to fail college. I mean, that it's easy. But I think that you kind of have to work at it at least a little bit just to get straight F's. And I think I worked at it pretty well. I skipped a lot of classes. And when I would go, it wasn't even that I went with the right intention, but I was in an environment that wasn't really conducive to my success. And part of that was that I just wasn't accepted. I picked a college at random. And when I went there in Pennsylvania, what ended up happening was that even the first day, the dean came up to us and said, looked at me and my dad and said, so you called me here for these two, and like turned around and walked away. And I experienced a lot of racism. So it really destroyed my confidence level. And constantly I would hear that I wasn't smart enough by my own teachers. I wasn't good enough, that I would be doing this, doing that. And I started to believe it. And it really destroyed my perception of myself and what I could do. And I just failed my first year of college because of it. And was pretty lost at that time, to be honest with you.
Well, and really, it just goes to show that the self-fulfilling prophecy, or I guess in that case, it's the everybody else fulfilling prophecy, is that it really is true that like once those seeds are planted, those seeds of doubt in yourself. Because I know you said like you came into it like you were, a good student. You were, at least at the schools you went to, you were kind of ahead of the game. And then you find yourself there, and I know how the story ends, and I'm not going to spoil it. But so what happened? Like you failed that first year, and so what happened at that point?
Well, and part of it really was that I did get straight A's like through high school and stuff like that, even though I would skip class and stuff like that. But I was just a good learner because I was naturally curious, so I got always A. I knew how to play that game. And at that point, having people constantly tell you that you're a failure, that you're just not smart, I started believing it. And when I failed, I went back to Puerto Rico and I started working construction. My dad was building houses at that point. And part of what happened was that when I was in high school, I had moved back from Florida to high school to live with my dad. And as I went over there, my dad's land wasn't selling as well. So he actually had to start doing other things on the side as well to pay for me to go to private school and stuff over there. But he started doing construction work and started like building his own houses and stuff like that on different sites. So I started working with him. And obviously he was the lead in it. But I would wake up at 4 a.m. and doing like super manual labor in the sun, breaking my back. And I was like, I think I want to go back to college. I don't know. I don't know if this is really for me. And it wasn't that I want to go back to college necessarily, but I realized that it just wasn't for me. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And I needed to find something else at that point.
Well, that was kind of like my Walmart story. It was like that. Okay, I'm not in college and what I'm doing really sucks. So maybe college isn't so bad. I should try it. So yeah, I can definitely relate. And so what did you do, or what happened that obviously where you are now is a very different place? So like, how did you get out of that place? You had, just failed your first year. You obviously probably felt pretty deflated and disappointed, and bad about yourself. And, you just, gone through hell with the way that you were being treated, and you go back to Puerto Rico and you're doing something you hate. And so like how did you snap out of that? Because that's a really, a dark place to be.
Well, part of it was that I realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do, obviously. And I didn't think about going back to school because obviously I had this mindset that I wasn't smart enough. I had parents that would tell me constantly, that I was, this genius and I could create anything. And they're very, very supportive and empowering. But I did lose my brother at that point in a car accident. And this was several months after I dropped out of college. And during that time, it has really transformed my life completely. I had to redefine who I was. And it was so painful that it kind of deconstructed me. I lost, and even just pointing to the fact of when it happened, from that moment I found out, it's like part of me died. So part of the old me, the old Joeel, my belief system, it was almost like I was at a blank slate. It was almost, I was crying hysterically when I first was told that he had been in a car accident. But when I was told that he had passed away, it was almost like I had an emotional shutdown. I was protecting myself because I couldn't deal with the pain at the time. So I lost myself completely at that point. And I ended up moving back to Florida with my mom. And, at the time we were struggling financially. So we were at a place that we were basically sleeping on the floor and then in an inflatable bed, sharing it. And, we had no furniture in the apartment. We didn't really even have that much food at the time. And it was just like that struggle, but that commitment, with my mom to kind of make it work. And so I ended up getting a job. My mom had a job. We knew we just had got to get back on our feet. One of the things I didn't mention is like, my mom, we used to move every 6 months to a year. So I was used to starting all over again. And this was part of that. So when I started all over again, in Orlando, I decided to go back to school. And I decided that I wanted to do something with my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point, but when he died, I knew I wanted to do something. I wanted to contribute to people's lives, to really help people at some level. I didn't know. I was always that helper in high school and middle school. I was always that kid that everyone talked about their problems with, but I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't even know you can actually do something with that. So I did ended up going back to school and took a psychology class, and it really blew my mind. It really shifted me. It made me reflect, and it gave me the hope that I could deal with the pain at some level. Because at the time I was in so much pain that I would even basically black out from my high blood pressure. Mind you, I was only 19. I was sleeping an hour or two a day, and my blood pressure would be so high during the day that I would basically black out at times. So.
And actually, I know a piece of that puzzle that not only did you go back to school, but that you got in a car accident too. So you were going to school injured. Is that correct?
Well, what happened was that we only had one car at the time. And I took the car out at night, and when I was pulling out, a semi truck hit me, and it totaled the car, flipped to another part of the street. I blacked out because my head hit the windshield. And it had been probably like a month and a half after my brother had passed away. So it was traumatizing for me, that maybe this is what he went through. But at that point, I threw out my back completely. I was told that I wasn't going to be able to walk by the age of 30 anymore. I had severe headaches and stuff like that. But I committed to myself. I said, if you can make it past this semester, not quit. And I had to walk several miles a day. In fact, I was probably had to walk like 5 or 6 miles a day, and then take another bus to then go somewhere for therapy, because I was going to therapy consistently too. I said, if I can make it through this, I couldn't even carry my book bag or books or anything. But I said, if I can make it through this semester, then I can make it through anything. So all I had to do was focus on this semester. And I did. I graduated. I finished the semester with all A's. And at that point, it was very clear to me that I had a higher purpose. And I told myself that I was going to open up a youth counseling center to help kids so they won't go through the same path, won't have to suffer and obviously what happened to my brother. So I went to school full time. And after that semester, I just had that vision, constantly looking at that vision. And I would tell people I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to open up a center. People would laugh at me. It's like, you failed your first year of college. I was like, yeah, I did. But I found purpose and I found meaning, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me from that at that point.
And so when you got to that point where you graduated, did you then go into business like you had had the idea for this center?
Well, what happened was that I graduated my bachelor's, and I was working full time, and I was working, and I knew that I didn't know what to do at that point. And I ended up going to get my master's at that point. And I was always thinking, like, once I finish school, I would open up a center. And I wasn't obviously ready at that point, so I had another excuse to go get the master's, because I still didn't really know what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. So I was like, well, school is the only way. And I love learning anyways, but I went back to get my master's, and then everything kind of shifted as far as with entrepreneurship and really diving into it, because I wasn't at that time. I had a child, and once Mia was born, it really shifted my life. It really made me realize that I wanted, I couldn't wait, that I couldn't live paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. I had to kind of create something on the side because I also wanted to follow my dreams. I wanted to also show her that it was possible, and I wanted to be more part of her life. I didn't want to just go through the whole schooling process and miss so much of her life. So I did end up kind of becoming more of an entrepreneur at that point again and kind of exploring that even deeper.
And so what was that transition point like? How did you start out, having entrepreneurial ventures again? And how did you find the time? I mean, I know you said you were working full time and you were going to school full time. So what was that next step?
Actually, I became highly efficient. It's like,
you think?
People realize how efficient you can be, but even like at every red light, I was studying. When I would use the bathroom, I had like cliff notes that I was like looking at. It's like if I was walking in campus, people used to know me as Forrest Gump because I used to run as soon as I got out of the car. But what I did was that I was an investigator at the time, and with child protective investigators, I was used to remove children from the house that were abused. And I spent a lot of hours on the road because I would have to pick up a child or go to a case, and then I would have to go to another case, which was an hour away. And then sometimes if I picked up a child, I would have to drive 4 hours to find them a shelter home. Or I had to pick up a child from a shelter home, several hours away to bring them back to our county because we had removed them from our county. So I became best friends with the library. I started looking for mentors to learn what to do. So I would consume sometimes 3-4 books in a week, sometimes listening to them over and over and over again, just to kind of solidify it in my brain that it was possible. And I heard one of the books that said, can you make $200 extra a month? And to me at that time, $200 was like crazy money, and even though I was making more money than I ever make, that's a big jump to just say, I'm going to start making $200 on the side. And I said, if you can't, then you should stop thinking about being an entrepreneur because you just don't have it in you. And I was like, I got it in me. I'm going to do this. So I started doing some research, and I found that you can buy surplus things online. And so I saved some money, and I ended up looking for things. And what happens is that like Macy's and different stores, they get rid of their surplus. So I ended up buying this whole lot of sandals, like hundreds of sandals at pennies, like 10 cents each. And I started selling them for $10 each at the flea market. And it was great, but I created another job. On the weekend, I was constantly in the flea market selling them, and I was making extra money. I was making more than that $200 a month that I said I had to make. But it was another job, and it was really taken away from the time that I really wanted to be able to create. But it wasn't enough really to be able to let go of my job at the time.
Well, and so obviously, I've had that experience too, where your business is just as bad as having a job because you're working yourself to death instead of working to death for someone else. But so, like, did you learn anything from that experience? Like, did you just stop doing it, or did you find a better way?
Well, I did learn one of the most valuable lessons I learned there is that one is that I was being the middleman. I could be a middleman. I great at researching. I was great at finding this. When people were asking me, how the heck are you even getting these sandals? I was like, oh, well, I'm just buying them. And, I bought them in surplus and stuff like that. And they're like, what does that even mean? So, and people initially were telling me, hey, I'd buy them from you for like $4 so I can sell some and make some money on the side. And initially I was like, why would I sell them to you for $4 when I can sell them for $10? It doesn't make sense. But I didn't really understand the power of being that middleman and embracing that. So I did a little bit more of that where I would sell them. And then I realized I make less money, but I create more freedom. And long term, I create more money because I can't be selling sandals all the time. So it's really something that created a good foundation for me moving forward in other businesses and learning how to value my time and learning how to kind of be that middle person that connects the dots. And like we like to say, we're both dot connectors for a lot of different industries when we work with them.
Yes, definitely. It's always the role that we've played, making those connections. And like you said, like sometimes other people they don't know how to do it. and you can be the one that connects the dots. But it's just like for you, you didn't know how to do it either, and you connected the dot by researching it, which is one of our biggest passions. If we don't, everything is figure outable if you're willing to do the work to figure it out. So the question is did that develop into something bigger, or what was next after that?
And actually, before I go there, I just want to point out one of the most underutilized tools out there is really the library, because if you don't have the money to get started or even buy audiobooks, and I love Audible at this point. We both listen to so many books and YouTube videos, and obviously at the time they didn't have YouTube, but it's just the library has such a wealth of resources. If it wasn't for the library, I wouldn't be who I am today, both as a kid and as an adult, just getting resources. So what ended up happening after that is that I moved out of that area and I was able to find a job doing something completely different. I was supervising daycares in Manatee County and subsidized childcare and doing some of the things like that as far as family-oriented things and social services. I had to move because if you're an investigator removing kids, and having a kid, it's you can't walk around the street with your kid, because if somebody that you remove your kid might see you, a drug addict that you remove their kid, you don't know how they're going to react. So I had to move far away from that area. And there I was doing counseling. I started doing side gigs, creating contracts for other places. So I was doing coaching, I was doing counseling, I was doing curriculum development and stuff like that. And part of that developed from my classes, because I was at the time going for my Ph.D. And what ended up happening is that I would have to write these 20-page papers every semester or every class. And so what I would do is that I would say, well, I'm going to focus it on this area. My company was going through downsizing, so I started doing research on downsizing. And I told my company I would like to help you through this downsizing process. And I'd like to do a workshop for the employees to gain motivation and stuff like that, and trust and blah, blah, blah. So I was able to do that, and then people started talking about me being a speaker. So then all of a sudden I started getting people saying, hey, would you like to be doing a workshop for our company? Because the top of our companies was telling other companies what I had done. So it kind of opened up things like that. But then every time I would finish a class, I would do a workshop about it somewhere else. So then I started creating workshops and creating curriculums and doing all these different things. So repurposing. So one of the things I learned from that was that when you're learning something, how can you apply it right away? Before I was going to school and just learning just to learn, just to get a degree, but I wasn't really gaining the experience. And from that, I was learning and applying it right away.
Well, and that's something that is really the core of what we do, is that we're constantly learning. And then we have such a habit now that as soon as we learn something, we're like, oh, we need to make a video about this. We need to teach a course about this. And so it's like they say that the best way to learn something is to teach it, which we definitely do. But then also, it's like you said, it's let's actually apply it. So we do read or listen to a lot of books. We take online courses. We've been to a multitude of conferences and workshops and events, and we've taken training programs. And every time we do that, we take what we learn and we apply it. We went to a conference once and learned a process and wrote a program at the conference, and then went back and launched it a couple weeks later. So, but it's a great habit that you got in way back then, which then when we started working together, it's really paid forward. And then also, repurposing. If you're going to have to do something anyway, you might as well turn it into something. And that's what, now we preach it from a perspective of information products. It's if you're going to have to write a paper for college or something, then why not turn it into an ebook and sell it? Or there's so many things that you can do. And geez, do I wish we had the technology we have today back then when we were starting. But I'm certainly glad we have it today.
And part of it, I really see that it's recognizing that we live in an information age and we all have something to teach. We have something that we can contribute and things like that. And that there's always more that we can do with it. When I graduated my master's, everyone would say you have to work at a school. or work in that type of setting. And nobody ever told me that I could actually look up information and do workshops on it. You know, I was lucky enough that I was thinking outside of the box. I saw people doing workshops and I said, hey, I can do that. And that I took information and started putting it out there. But you don't really know everything that you can do with your tools, you know, and so researching, looking at what other people are doing with their knowledge and things like that. And one of the valuable things that I learned from that experience was really the fact that to go where the clients are, you know, and I had several different things that I had done as far as business goes, but it's like I was always looking for clients, and through workshops and doing those things, I recognized that I can do a workshop and charge for that workshop, but instead of like trying to market a newspaper or do things like that, I can go to like the Women's Resource Center if I was doing a workshop specifically for women, and they have a whole list of women that would be interested in that, you know, or going to a specific company and contracting with them. Like I worked at the hospitals, doing team building and working with their staff and stuff, going where the clients are at. And that really made a huge difference for me in being able to grow faster, because then I would just develop relationships with the people leading organizations that had my client, and they opened the door for me to really connect to the people I wanted to help.
Well, and I really loved that. And we've learned that lesson over and over and over again. We've had a lot of experiences through all the things we've done where it's like, instead of having to market, you just connect in and you go where the people already are. And so sometimes when we talk about it, I think people think we're crazy because there's so much that, like, we're always being bombarded by all these things you're supposed to do with marketing. And today, obviously, back then it was like newspaper ads, but now you can still do that. But then, you know, there's Facebook ads and all of these things to try to market, and plus they're expensive. And there's so many things that we've done that we just skipped that whole process and just went straight to the people. It's like, we cannot reiterate it enough that is the key. Like, and in another episode, we're going to get into all of the business ventures that have happened since we met. And that we'll be getting more into that and giving more examples of how that works. But like, this is a great example of kind of where that lesson originated from, that gave us the idea for all the creative ways that we were able to market, you know, further on down the journey of entrepreneurship without having to dish out a bunch of cash.
Yeah, one of the other things was that I really connected to the community. Since I was doing a lot of things, I would do actually a lot of volunteer work and networking, and so a lot of people that were leaders in the community got to know me, and they knew my passion for contributing. You know, I was part of the Hispanic and Migrant Association. You know, I was part of the youth council in the community where I would help with teen pregnancy and different stuff like that. And then I was doing so many workshops and developing curriculums when it came to specifically for relationships. I was doing for leadership. I was doing for parenting. So I was in so many different niches, really solidifying these relationships. And I realized that, you know, having those relationships is really key. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people developing stuff, they think it's just a one-man show. But if you're focused in one specific area, it's like you have to develop relationships and people that are in that area.
Well, and what's so interesting about that is I came from like social service type background too. And that really, especially for people who are in a heart-centered field, or they want to be an entrepreneur, maybe you're not ready yet, like being in social services, some sort of community setting is actually a great way to start, especially if what you want to do potentially is something local, because it's really just about meeting people. And so it was a great foundation to have all those connections, then to be able to take yourself independent when you started to do things. And so that brings me to my next question, which was like, what was that next step? Did you stay working in a regular job? Did you start a business? Like, how did that all go?
Well, what happened was that I wasn't happy what I was doing. I'm sorry, I didn't graduate with, because my core job, my main job, obviously I was doing all these contracts on the side, so I was working a lot of hours. And then I was basically doing a lot of paper pushing during the day for the most part. So I wasn't passionate about it, hated it. And I remember somebody telling me in one of my workshops, you need to learn how to work smarter, not harder. And it really struck me. And I was like, well, what do I want to do? You know, what do I want to shift in that? So I did a brainstorming session with my family, and I always loved photography since I was young. Obviously, I said I wanted to be a nature documentarist. So we said, well, I can start a photography business. I put it on this board, and we brainstormed how would I do that. And I was so excited that I actually ended up getting contracts online, developing my own contracts that day just to be ready for that when I got that big contract. Visualized it. I was really big into visualization, and I had done a lot of work also not only to learn about entrepreneurship, but about personal development, being in the psychology field and stuff. So I understood kind of the power of the mind, and I watched The Secret not that long ago. So I was like, well, I'm going to visualize this into reality. So I had that, and I was telling people I had a photography company and blah, blah, blah. And then I heard someone say, well, our photographer, you know, we need to figure out what we're going to do. Our photographer called down. This was like 3 days after I said I was going to open up a photography business. So I walked up to them and said, hey, you know, and they knew me from the community. I said, I have a photography company. I would love to be able to go there and do your photo shoot at your daycare center. And they said, okay, you know, show us some shots. And when can you start? I said, I can start right away. They're like, well, can you start doing it 3 days from now? Because our photographer called out. I was like, yeah, I can have that ready. So what was interesting was that they didn't tell me how many daycares I knew they had a lot of daycares that ended up being like 6 daycares that I had to do within a week. So I went that day and I bought the lightings. I set them up. I had my daughter I bought props from Walmart. I set them up and I started watching videos of how to do lighting and learning as much as I could. I took a couple pictures, showed it to them. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. We need someone. So in that, I told my boss that I had to basically do this for this week. I had a contract. She was like, okay, you know, do what you got to do. And so I made more money in that week than I made in a month, a lot more than I made even in 1 month. And I remember counting all that cash and people's orders and doing all this thing. It was so exciting. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. You know, I could do something and make money and not have to be a slave, really. So that developed. I started doing sports photography for little league teams and doing a bunch of other stuff and really even like finding ways to order stuff for them. So they would say, I need some balls, I need this. So I started getting stuff and ordering them. So I used that money to fulfill my dream. And shortly after that, I opened up the youth coaching center in Orlando, ALCC. So I left everything behind. I went back to Orlando. I opened the center, and you know, at the beginning it was just like craziness. You know, everything from scratch. We were just learning how to create it. You know, what we were gonna do. We even started doing like Spanish lessons on the side just to make ends meet. I remember going to the school and telling them our vision of what we wanted to do. You know, coach students and stuff. They're like, yeah, about that. You know, you don't have a license, right? And you're not. You know, what's your background? I explained. They're like, yeah. Talk to us later. And they didn't want to hear it. The school district didn't want to hear it. And the sheriff department didn't want to hear it at the time. So we went to the mega churches and we started talking to them and they said we can work with them. And at that point, I took that information and had gone to another institution and said, hey, we're working with all the mega churches with the sheriff department. And they said, oh, okay, you know, we work with them, we partner with them. And do you want to bring us the proposal tomorrow? So we stayed up all night writing this proposal for them and turned in the proposal, hadn't slept all night, got it printed early in the morning, Kinko's, turned it in. And then I had family issues at the time, family medical issues and stuff. So I ended up leaving the business, not really understanding what's happening with the contract and everything. So I had to leave that business completely at that point.
And so that was about 6 weeks in. So if you heard my interview in the last episode, that business is the one that I ended up taking over. And we'll tell the story of like how that really went down. But that was where the dots connect between your story and mine. And actually, I just remembered a part of the story of you opening that center that you had talked about before, which was that you had visualized the opening day and how that was going to go. And just like, what happened when I was transitioning, ironically, to that same center, that this visualization of what we wanted came to be. So you want to share that part?
Yeah, and it was crazy because I remember sitting in the couch the day before we were supposed to open, and we had reached out to all the newscasters around the area, and I sat there and I visualized it, and I was visualizing all the time at this point in my life, and I was seeing the reporters asking me questions. It was like so real. And I remember that day that we did the grand opening, we were sitting there at the courtyard where I was supposed to be being interviewed, and I was waiting. I was like, I had seen it. This is going to happen. And nobody was showing up. And it had been like an hour from the time that we told everyone. My business partner said, they're not going to come, Joel. And I was like, yeah, they are. I saw it. They have to come. And she thought I was delusional at the time. And then as we started getting ready to say, well, we got to wrap it up, they showed up. A couple of the stations showed up, and they were interviewing us and asking us questions just where I had visualized it. And it was like this confirmation of a powerful force of creation, of being able to see something and really create it, And obviously we put a lot of work into it. I contacted every news media, sent them letters, called them, and did whatever we had to do to make that a reality as well.
And so you mentioned that 6 weeks in, you ended up having to leave that company. So one question would be, how did you feel about that? Because I know that this was like the idea you had years and years ago that you wanted to create this center to honor your brother. So how did you feel about leaving it? And then also, what did you do at that point?
Well, obviously, it was very hard for me to leave initially, but there was so much happening at the time that I didn't really have time to process it. But at the same time, I felt like I had done what I promised that I would do. So I wasn't leaving it feeling terrible about it. It hurt because obviously that was my baby. I really saw it's something that I've been working on for 10 years. In fact, I had written a vision in college, my first psychology class, of where I saw myself in 10 years. And when I moved there, I opened it up and I was doing exactly what I said I was going to do. I was opening the center and stuff like that. But I also realized that I'd done my part and it was there and it was going to contribute to the life of youth, but that it didn't necessarily have to define me, and that I wanted to really work with people. I was in social service. Part of me wanted to work with people that really wanted to change at that point. I was already working with youth before I left the organization because we were already starting to have families coming in before we had those contracts. So in those 6 weeks, we're already working with a lot of those families, and we were very active in the community. But I also realized that I really wanted to work on people that were open to change. And that from that point, when I moved, I couldn't work a full-time job because of the family issues. So I ended up looking for ways to really make money.
So, is this is the part of the story where it's let's go back to what I knew before as far as side hustling.
Yeah, and it was funny because I was like, what could I do that I didn't have to be out of the house much? And that wouldn't take that much time. And I started doing research, and I saw people talk about how they were making money scrapping metal. And I was like, scrapping metal? It was funny because families you have a graduate degree and you're going to be scrapping metal for a living. I was like, well, you got to do what you got to do, right? So I lived in an apartment, so I would go where people would put things curbside and stuff like that. And I started scrapping them or selling them on Craigslist. And I would wake up at 4 a.m. I started doing that, and then I would go to all the apartment complexes in the area. By the time I got back home, I would fill up my car and then get my mom's car and her little SUV, and I would fill that up with things to then take it to the scrapyard with her to then get our money for the day and cash for the day. And actually, I was probably making more money doing that than I was making before at the other job that I had previously. So, but it was really also deteriorating my body. When you're working with all these metals and cutting them up and doing all these different things and lifting stuff, it was just really tearing me up, and it was not something I was passionate about. I took some of that money and we bought, again, the bulk stuff that I had mentioned before. We started buying jewelry in bulk and selling it on eBay. So every day I had to go also to send things out. But it wasn't really fulfilling me. So I started telling people around that I wanted to be a college professor. And I would tell everyone that I would meet. And there's somebody that I was doing workshops with on the side. I was able to get some things to do workshops as I started transitioning out of that, because I could do that for a couple hours a day. And it ended up that I bumped into Michael, and his wife worked at the college, and I got a temporary position. And then after a semester of doing adjunct, they offered me the full-time position because I had a good relationship with the students. I had high enrollment. As soon as they opened up the classes, all my classes were full. So they're like, do you want to take this? We'll give it to you for a year full-time. And so I became a college professor, and they were really the ones investing in me. And I also had to feel that because for me, my psychology professor transformed my life. I went from being hopeless, gone, to really having a vision and purpose. And he really helped me develop that. So for me to be back in that step to help people that were first-year college students that were kind of lost, to be able to give them some guidance and give them psychology tools that transformed my life, it was like I was in heaven. I was in heaven for a while, and I felt like I was giving back, because after my first year, I said, one day I want to come back and I want to be a professor and give back to what I was given. So I was able to do that in that perspective.
Well, and I just want to add here that you weren't just like your everyday psychology professor. You were a little bit more like the nutty professor, and you had some very alternative ways of teaching. So I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit about that, because I think a lot of the personality that you brought to teaching in an academic setting has also been what's influenced the way that we teach in our, online courses, and then all of the workshops and trainings we've done in person as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I loved is that I had flexibility to be myself. And I used to get on top of the tables and walk on top of the tables. A lot of my classes, like I remember first class, was like as soon as people would put stuff down, I'd play Guess Who's the Professor is. So I would hide between the students and pretend to be a student. I had this whole thing orchestrated, and people were like, I just want to know who it is, and I'm like trying to pretend I'm one of the students and being like freaked out that who's the professor here. And it was a fun game. A lot of our classes, we would hold them outside. So we would come to class and I'd be like, okay, we're going to go out, sit in the field, everyone just kind of hang out. And we used to have a lot of discussions. Our finals were at the beach, when I would tell students, oh, we're having our final at the beach or at the bowling alley or somewhere else, people were like, what do you mean? It's like, it's a final. It's like, yeah, I know. So it was really, I try to create an experiential experience for them to really dig deep into their own life, to apply psychology, not just learn psychological terms, but really, how does this impact my life, and how can I use it, and how can I reflect on my past, and how can I use this also to help people around me? And that's really what I wanted my students to get out of it. And I was loving it and growing just like them. And I would always tell them that with everything that they shared, they helped me grow, and I just wanted to help them grow and contribute as well.
And so really, that foundation is what sparked us to want to continue to teach a lot of the things that you were teaching in your psychology classes, but to do it to the general population in a non-academic setting. And so that really is what influenced us, and all the, when we came together, all the workshops that we used to do, and today all the online courses, we like to come at it from that same standpoint of like, we want it to be something that people internalize. So it's not just, teaching information, it's helping people acquire knowledge and apply it to their lives. And so obviously at this point in your story, here you are back in traditional employment, although realistically, we used to talk about it because when I met you, you were the college professor too, that it's about as close to being an entrepreneur as you can be and still be in a job, because you have a lot of flexibility and you're the one in charge, which is awesome. And so in the next episode, we're going to kind of pick up where this story leaves off, and how we came together and how everything transitioned into the business that we have today. So make sure that if you're watching this one, you stay tuned for the next episode. And so I'm going to end with a final question, which is, what is the biggest difference that you want to make in the lives of the people that you serve?
Well, and before I answer that, I also want to point out that I was teaching, but I was also doing workshops on the side, and I was coaching and doing other stuff. So I still had the entrepreneurial side of that process and developing other things. And like you said, being a college professor would really give me the flexibility to really create my own thing. And also I was teaching entrepreneurship skills for some of the groups that I was running in the college with the youth and stuff. So I got to explore a lot of those things as well. And when I look at what is the difference that I want to make in the world, it's really letting people know and be that example that you can really create anything that you want in your life. That the only limitations that you have in your life is you. You know, I've been through so many challenges. Some people, you know, and obviously we'll get to some of the other ones where I was definitely ill, bedridden for a year and stuff like that in the next episode. But it's really looking at that within all those things, there was growing opportunities. There was growth opportunities. There, you know, we always are at a choice point, you know, and those things help us grow and develop to who we are. And that, you know, regardless where you're at right now, that you can create whatever reality you want. You can learn the new skills that you need to learn. You can take in the information that you need to take in. You can surround yourself with people that are going to empower you, that are also going to maybe help you think outside of your box, which I did a lot of the time, even if it was only through audiobooks and stuff. But is that you can create that reality, that there's nothing stopping you, that you can, in 6 months from now, if you make that decision, if you make that commitment and you're willing to put in the work, that you can wake up 6 months from now and find yourself in a totally, totally different reality. That you can take any pain that you might have in your journey and create purpose and meaning out of that. That you can take a curse and really turn it into the biggest blessing that you could have ever imagined. That you can realize that you have the power to write your own story. And by doing that, you really empower everyone around you to do the same thing.
Well, amen to that. And your story is perhaps the best example of that I've ever seen. Because obviously, there's some people who have some crazy stories out there. But what's so unique about you is that there isn't a long gap between when something like happens to you that's a huge roadblock and then you finding a way to change your perspective, to use it as fuel, to let it be a bouncing off point. And it's like, no matter what life throws at you, you just spin it one way or another to your advantage. Sometimes just because you feel like you don't have a choice. But the truth is that you do have a choice, because there's a lot of people who don't choose to go back to school, who don't choose to keep going to their classes, even though they have a severe back injury from a car accident, and who don't choose to get up at 4 a.m. and scrap metal and, you know, do whatever you had to do. And because a lot of people just choose to say, oh, poor me, like I had to quit my job, or I had to leave my business, or these bad things happened to me. And you never did that. You just always looked forward and said, where am I going to go from here? And that perspective is why you've been able to completely transform your life. Like, even from when I met you almost a decade ago, you've transformed dramatically. But I know from your story and everything we've ever talked about over the years is that the person you were 10 years before that was even more of a completely different person. And I feel the same way. So I honor you for the example that you are to other people. And I hope everybody that is listening to this can find that within themselves, that if Joeel could have made it through all of these obstacles and more to come in the next episode, then there is a light at the end of the tunnel, no matter where you're at right now. And if you're not an entrepreneur yet and you want to be, then we hope that our journeys show you that it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's not going to be perfect, that it can unfold in strange and unexpected ways. and that you don't have to start from scratch. You can use what you already have at your disposal. You can find a bridge to entrepreneurship. You can start a side hustle in addition to your job. Like if Joeel, he has work ethic like a crazy rabid beaver, like working full-time, going to school full-time, having a baby, and doing side hustles. Like, it's complete madness, but you want to know what? Like, it worked. It got him out of his situation. It got him opportunity. And sometimes that's what it takes. And of course, we don't want to live that way all the time. We actually, we're working too much, too hard, and had a road bump because of it. So we've learned our lesson on that. But the truth is that you got to do what you got to do to live the life you want to live. And Joel's story is such the perfect example of that. And so with that said, we look forward to the next episode where we get to pick up where we left off and talk about everything that has happened since we met and how our business has evolved since then.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, fellow Freedom Junkies, for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to help us grow, please rate and share this podcast. You can also become a member of Freedom Nation. Visit freedomorbustpodcast.com and sign up to receive access to exclusive content and take the 21-day happiness challenge. As you know, we believe that entrepreneurship is the ultimate form of empowerment, which is why we created the Side Hustle Business Startup course for anyone looking to create their own income and take back their power. We offer an exclusive discount for our podcast listeners. Find out more at freedomorbustpodcast.com.